It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And we have a guest.
Hi everybody, my name is Isaac Fellman.
And today we are here to discuss the exhibition, a love exhibition. And today we are here to discuss The Expedition, a love story by Bia Uzma. It is tradition for the guest to give us the plot of this book. So Isaac, take it away.
So The Expedition is my favorite book of polar history, and it's not particularly because of the story that it tells, although it is the story of one of the most fascinating and bizarre expeditions in the sort of polar world, which is the Andree Expedition, which was an 1897 attempt to go over the North Pole in a balloon. This is not a thing that is possible to do. So before anybody asks, you can't do it, and you shouldn't try. It's the reason that this book speaks to me so much is because it is the story of Uzma's relationship with the expedition and sort of the ways that it haunts her, the ways that it obsesses her, the ways that she tries from so many different angles to get closer and closer to this story, to understand the psyches of the people involved, the stories of their bodies, the ways that they died. She has a unique background. She's an illustrator who is also a doctor and began studying medicine. She admits in the book, quite possibly as a result of her interest in this expedition. And so she applies all of these different ways of thinking that she's been trained in to trying to understand why you would do this and how it ended. And I don't think it's a spoiler. It's an old story. It's a book whose point is not its plot, to say that she does not get there. You know, she comes pretty close to some answers, but a lot of the story remains unresolved. And I think that it is a beautifully written, sort of despairingly funny book, which is also, I should add, I looked her up on Wikipedia last night after previously knowing nothing about her life, and her divorce went through in 2012, and this book was published in 2013.
That.
This is a very divorced book about trying and failing to understand other people. And I, as a divorced writer and now a remarried writer, I get that so much. You know, sometimes we have to write through it. So that's what The Expedition is about.
Yes. So the Observant will have noted several things about that, one of which is that this is a book of nonfiction, at least putatively, which is
literary nonfiction, but nonfiction
yes.
Nonetheless.
It's a new direction for us. As such, the author is dead in a different way.
I mean,
because the author is a character in the story, and also the author is an unreliable narrator, which is a fascinating thing to encounter in this realm. And like a consciously unreliable narrator too, which is all sorts of interesting, and is like the top of my list for like why you should read this book, is because we're doing a little bit of sort of metafiction and trickery in what is at least putatively supposed to be a work of journalism or history.
Yes. It does not have wizards in the traditional sense, and from the author does not appear to be a lesbian.
I mean, the acknowledgments suggest to me that the author is, was dedicating this to somebody with a woman's name.
Yeah, I think that's her sister, according to...
Oh,
I see. More research has been done.
If I may, I do have a take.
Okay, let's get your take.
So I initially, before I began my reread, I thought, okay, well, they're united in her. They are two sides of, I'm using the term in like a morally neutral way. They're the two sides of thinking for an amateur historian. The person who is sort of applying like mystical methods to history and sort of like a winding path of associations, and is doing things that result in interesting leaps of thought, but not things that a professional historian would do. Whereas the lesbian is the side of her that is leading with desire and longing, and just wanting to Longing is a classical lesbian emotion. I won't say that like it's inherently queer to be obsessed with three dead men, but you know, it's more queer than it's more queer than like a straight marriage. I don't know. After finishing the book for the second time, I now think she's the lesbian for the reasons that I've laid out. Because of longing, it's a thin twig, but it's very real to me. I think Andree is the wizard because his expedition is all about magical thinking. We can save this for post spoilers to talk about it further, but it's really just
we
about
will.
yeah,
Yes.
like what we want to happen.
If this were a novel, he would absolutely be the wizard figure, so...
Yeah.
My alternate summary of the Andree Expedition is three of the world's most special little boys dressed up in their most special little jester outfits. Walk up and slap the face of God, and the inevitable
Yeah.
happens to them almost immediately.
One of my notes says these men are dressed like Tintin because there's like a description of what they're wearing and they're dressed like Tintin.
I'm afraid Tintin undersells it. This is what Nils was wearing. Black and white checkered socks. Blue knickerbockers with the matching vest. A red striped jumper. A bespoke hunting jacket with asymmetrical pockets. With a satin lining. Both checkered and striped, and a gold heart-shaped locket around his neck. No, these are the silliest, ponziest little men, and they get what's coming to them.
Okay, but I'm going to note something here, because this is one of my top reasons why to read this book, is that one of my real pet peeves in science fiction fandom is the idea that the engineer is this, grand figure of competence and manliness. And two of these three men, including Andree, were engineers, and boy, is this just the opposite of competence porn.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Do you want to shatter the myth of the engineer? Tell people to read this book.
It's an airship. It's Sid the engineer in his silly outfit and his goggles, going up in this balloon, which does not hold.
Yeah, it turns out that when you do this without your
hydrogen
materia
gas.
or your your esper crystals or whatever, your balloon doesn't fly so well.
Yeah, it's just you fondly imagine you can steer it by dragging
over the North Pole.
over the North Pole.
It gets cut, among other things, they just didn't pay any attention to how gas behaves.
Yes. Well, I mean, it was an optimistic time in history. We'll put it that way, particularly if you were a rich Norwegian / Swede. So.
Okay, so why should you read this book? It is, as a work of literary nonfiction, it is excellent. And just the translation is quite good, I think. The translation doesn't have that stilted translation-ese thing going on at all. It manages, it does a very good job, I think, of not over localizing while still really recreating a very conversational style.
And honestly, personally, the journey of exactly how much of what the author was writing I was meant to take seriously and what I was meant to take metaphorically was very fun as I went through it. As to why you shouldn't read it, not a whole lot of reasons. This is extremely short, so you can get through it real quick, and you'll know if you want an answer to the mystery, then what are you doing reading this, first of all? But if you're going to be disappointed that this does not, give a solid, resolution to the 15 years of this woman's life that went into this, you're slightly missing the point.
More, actually, because apparently she's doing another expedition to the island.
And if you count the possibly real, possibly not Eurovision Song Contest entry, then perhaps your entire life. But regardless, if you want to know how these men died, this is not the book for you.
I suppose if you're a professional historian studying this particular area, I'm sure there are a gajillion things that will annoy you about it, but I'm sure you've also already read the book because you really got to read the major works of pop history in your field.
Anything that you'd like to add to that, Isaac?
Number one, the translation really is beautiful. Like a shout out to Agnes Brume, who put this together very quickly as well. I mean, even accounting for the fact that the book is quite short and came out a year after it came out in Sweden. Oh my gosh. No, I'm ready to just go into it. I have so many thoughts.
Okay, so content warnings then?
Yeah. Various ways that you can die in the Arctic.
All of them.
Actually, a comprehensive list of ways that you can die in the Arctic.
Yeah, there's a lot of description of unpleasant ways to die, I think, is the main one.
Yeah, and like, descriptions of corpses and body parts, and all around general unhealthy obsessions.
Yeah. Mentions of suicide. It's a book that it's not, I wouldn't say that it's one of the book's preoccupations, but it definitely takes a level look at it as one of the ways that at least one of them could have died. And so you do have to go into it in a certain mood, I think. But I also think that Usma is she's quite careful, to my mind, with the readers with her reader's heart. The descriptions, some of them are quite brutal and quite quite clinically intense, the descriptions of the bodies and so forth. But she does have some distance from them as a doctor, and I think she encourages us to do the same, to just sort of see this as just part of the process of life and death.
I would say that this ends up being a Scandi crime drama.
Yes.
And it has the tone of a Scandi crime drama. So if you know what that is, you pretty much know what to expect. But let's get into talking about it. Hey, dead boys, where you been? Smashed up toys, are you lost again? The wind has blown, will you find your coordinates home? Your gas ran low, did you crash again? Swedish boys, do you need a friend? Skeletons, are your heads on wrong? To the extent that spoilers are possible under the circumstances, and the author does a good job pretending that there are, we are off to the spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone!
Spoiler
zone. So yeah, and Andree's a fucking wizard. He's so wizardy, and I believe that the author, the way that you could also say that the author is a wizard is because she feels a great kinship, I think, with Andree, in that she like specifically in the compulsive research that Andree and crew do, and the compulsive research that she finds herself doing, and the way in which that research is, as she repeatedly says, both real and imaginary.
Yeah, they just start collecting samples. They don't know anything about like biological science or geology. Like, there's a great list at some point in this book of all the things that they don't know that they really should know at this point.
Right.
Because I guess since we're in the spoiler zone, the balloon is aloft for a couple days, and then it crash lands because it turns out that the air, this is one of the things that they didn't know. In the Arctic is quite humid. It weighs the balloon down. It soaks it. The water gets frozen because that's what water does when it's very cold. It can't stay up under its own weight, and they have to try to walk home, which...
Plus, also, the balloon has been leaking since they started filling it.
It has been leaking because it's sewed together, and that means it's full of little holes.
Yes.
Something which Andree was well aware of and fudged the numbers on, and surreptitiously refilled it with gas to make the numbers look better, which is when one of the original expedition members bailed on the expedition.
And like, we, the whole like project was predicated on the idea that it's always sunny in the Arctic Circle. And like, we are far enough into the age of sail that if they just asked some whalers, they could have
Yeah.
found out that that's not correct. I mean, that's really easily falsifiable.
It's really wild because I'm sorry, I'm going to lay some like 1830s polar history on you for just a second.
Absolutely.
There was a theory that like already in like the early to mid Victorian era was widely discredited by anyone who had been up there. But like a lot of people who were high up at the British Admiralty believed in the theory of the open polar sea, the idea that like the sea at the North Pole, it's just like a ring of ice, and like you get any further north than that, the sun is shining all the time. So like there's a big hole and you can just sail through it like once you get through the difficult part. And I just it's interesting to me because like what Andree is doing.
Like the eye of the Arctic storm or something.
For just one time, if I could sail the Northwest Passage.
Yeah. So it's like it's a flashback to that, even though like obviously they know full well it's not true, but somewhere in like in their hindbrains, the idea that it's going to be nice up there.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. The sun's right there. You're close.
Well, and you know, it's because when you think about what's the coldest winter days you can imagine, right? It's those sunny, clear, icy, windy, cold days. And so, of course, obviously, the coldest place on the planet is going to be like the coldest day you can imagine. And thus, it's got to be sunny and clear, right?
Sure.
I mean, QED.
Yeah, no, this is all stuff. It makes sense. How do you get something so tight? Silk and the way that those seamstresses do up that silk so that there's hardly any seam. That's got to be like the firmest, and least porous substance that you could possibly think of, right? So.
To give them credit, they did like slap a bunch of varnish on it, but they didn't slap enough varnish on it, and they didn't bring enough varnish to like repair anything.
They didn't bring enough varnish from Stockholm. So when they found holes in it when it was in the hangar, they just had to go, man. The eyes of the world were upon them. They'd already had to cancel this expedition once. That's why all of their stuff, including, this is my favorite fact in the whole book, the undersides of their carrier pigeon's wings was stamped with Andree Polar Expedition 1896.
Well, here I wish to take issue with this, because the fact that she sees a stuffed pigeon in an exhibition with Andree stamped under its wing does not mean that they stamped living birds' wings.
Okay. No, I take your point.
I believe that this is one of those little fanciful details that the author has put in there, along with the name of Niels's fiancée, meaning hydrogen balloon in French. That is meant to sort of we're meant to have a few things that are just completely cockamamie sprinkled in here, just to let us know that that part of this is like, and this is why she keeps saying real research and fake research, that this is in part a work of speculation and a work of poetry. It's a love story, and so we're going to put in a few like real sort of things that you could stub your toe on, like the living pigeons with the name stamped under their wings, which I don't believe for a second. Well, there's egg on my face here. Turns out that homing pigeons got their wings stamped all the time, on the pin feathers and across the wings, so there's that. And in fact, they do refer to gas balloons as charlier in sort of technical circles in France. So that's also technically true. There are a lot of facts presented in this book which seem ridiculous on their face, but check out if you look at them through a particular interpretive framework later on. I think that the theme of what can be known and what can't, and the unreliability of the narrator, that's still there. It's just I'm not as smart as I think I am.
Andree is a figure who like attracts stories like this. Like I have read a more ostensibly factual Andree book. It was, God, I wish I could remember. My best friend stole it immediately after I bought it.
Speaking of book theft, the first thing the author does is to admit to stealing a book, which suggests that the author is not to be trusted.
But it was like a pre-1950 Andree book, and there's like a whole anecdote in there about how as a young man he came to America, and after traveling around for a while, he thought that he was getting sick, like he was dying, like his stomach felt weird, and he thought it was the water in America, but it turns out it was because he was only eating sweets and ice cream exclusively, which I don't think is plausible either, but it has the ring of truth. And so like just something about this man's life that, but you're right, it's definitely, it can't be true about them.
you're right, though. I mean, but there's so much Barnum in what Andree is doing, right? You
Hmm.
know, like he's from this big, scarlet silk, air balloon, which is going to be visible and like be a spectacle for all of these people. You know, this guy is, this guy's kind of a mountebank, and and like in the classic style has his name written, if not literally on his pigeon's undersides, on like on like every other piece of, clothing and equipment he owns. Andree Expedition is stamped on the crates to like the little metal implements to the medicine stuff. He's a massive egoist. He's very American, actually, in a certain way.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a carny is a carny everywhere. You don't have to be American. We just are very good at producing them.
It's true.
And I mean, part of the thing that distinguishes him from a lot of mountebanks is that he genuinely believes this. I mean, this is why he dies.
And I believe that it is the sincerity of his approach that is part of what makes these men so charismatic to be.
Well, I mean, yeah, because for one thing, it's a mirror of her own obsession, right? Like, because part of the mystery here isn't just what happened to these men, it's why did these men do this? What leads somebody to ignore all of these incredibly obvious danger signs and still fly your balloon right, into the storm? I mean, including just everybody watching them take off goes, wait, that was a botched takeoff. They need to make an emergency landing now. And they don't.
I adore the slapstick that the author puts into that takeoff sequence. Like it's Looney Tunes from right from the jump.
It really is. It just they run into like a wall. Like there's
Yeah.
there's the balloon is supposed to be and like if this doesn't make any sense, it's because it doesn't make any sense. But the balloon is supposed to be steerable via these like long guy ropes that were supposed to scrape against the ground and a sail. And
which is another of these things that sound that, superficially you go, oh, okay, I can see how that makes sense. And then you think about it for like 30 seconds and you're like, no, wait, no, it doesn't.
why would that make sense? And like the ropes, this is like my favorite thing that I'm pretty sure did happen in the book.
Mm-hmm.
They're designed in two parts that are like screwed together so that like there's a long option for the rope and a short option. I don't fully understand it, but like I said, it doesn't make any sense anyway. And like the balloon like spins around in the wind, something happens to it, and all of the ropes unscrew at once, and they lose like most of the rope that was the whole thing. And they
Right.
just
Yes,
they
Which
okay.
would be a lot more tragic if the ropes actually did anything. But
Yes, this Looney Tunes physics, like they were meant to, I guess, haul the ropes in and unscrew them and then drop them down again if they were getting closer to the ground or something. But yeah, but but I think that as you pointed out, you do have to like put this next to how Looney Tunes, the real science of this era was.
yeah.
How gonzo it was. Like this isn't explored in the book except via sort of footnotes, but do you know how they were making the hydrogen gas that goes in this balloon? They were taking like a giant pile of nails,
yeah, no, this is in the book.
but then pouring hydrochloric acid on it.
Yes.
So
And which releases hydrogen gas.
which releases hydrogen gas in the most dangerous and you're just sort of trying to catch the hydrogen gas as this is happening because you don't have like a mechanism to do it otherwise. It's the most like, again, sort of Acme Industries cartoonish like way to do something, but it is the way that worked.
It's a great way of putting that. Yeah.
So sure, why not? We're being an engineer is kind of like, making a sort of a cockamamie Rube Goldberg device in this period in time. And they're going to use that to challenge, like, I was trying to find a word for God, big enough to encompass the dispassionate savagery of nature. And I came up with the episteme, which is exactly the opposite of what I meant.
Yes. Though I gotta say, when your meteorologist bails on your project, maybe that's a sign.
Your meteorologist who's like a real scientist bails, and then like the next year you're like, I'm gonna take this pliable hunk. He can basically
Right.
do what a meteorologist does.
Right.
Because I'm going to swap in out our the guy who's trained for somebody who's handsome and has a really cool story, who's leaving his, which will help me with my newspaper sponsorship, incidentally. It's not a university that's paying for this, it's the newspaper.
Yeah, great sign.
Well, the newspapers got their money's worth.
They absolutely did. No, I loved the, he's still dead, picture that they run of her, that takes up some column inches that we get an excerpt from later on in the book. Grocery hiatus. We were talking about using Looney Tunes contraptions to assault God with.
Yes.
Because there's absolutely a wizardly element of hubris to this.
Yes. I think that the combination of the kind of sheer force of personality that can convince people to follow you into obvious icy death and hubris is definitely the wizard right there.
Yes, and I love that there's a note that which leads into the final hypothesis that they treat the polar bears with, quote, a complete lack of respect.
Right.
Nils Strindberg is like running out of the tent, like waving his arms, trying to make them go away, and it works a few times.
Which again feels so Looney Tunes, like coming up to the big guy and being like, "Off with you, sir."
That's right. Okay, I do have to now insert a random fact from the Googling I did before this episode, because I was like, what is Bia Usma up to these days? And apparently she spent the last 10 years working on a follow-up book about the expedition. Yes. And last summer she tried to put together another expedition to go to White Island, but unfortunately they could not land because there were too many polar bears.
Yes. So let's pivot. So we have one wizard, Andree. Let's pivot to our other wizard, Bia, who is painting, clearly a bit of a tongue-in-cheek portrait here, but is painting a portrait of a life that has been controlled by this obsession to an extraordinarily unhealthy degree. Not always for the negative. It appears to have turned her into a doctor, which is probably good for the world, and for her community.
It's one of the things that really draws me to this book is sort of the way that subtextually she examines, okay, what if your mental breakdown is productive? What if it's helpful to other people? Is it a breakdown at that point? I mean,
it depends on how many people you eventually kill by running the boat into ice in the Arctic Circle.
Yes. Do you ruin 3 lives or save 3 lives? That's the math right there.
And if you do both, does it balance out? And and maybe your son would really prefer that you move on from this. He does appear briefly to be like, "Mom, I don't understand the crux that your life is built around."
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, she actually has 2 children, and her children only get mentioned extremely briefly, and I did keep wondering what they thought of Mom sort of running off to possibly die in the Arctic.
Yeah, no, there's a much. And I think that she, as a writer, is clearly aware of this. There's much that is delicately off screen or past off stage that is really weighing heavily on the stuff that is happening on stage.
Yes, though honestly, I think that's a much better choice than to have made her children obvious figures in the book. So honestly, good job, Bia Usma there.
No, if this was the different. If the tone of this was 5 degrees different, I would be really uncomfortable even discussing it.
Right.
But it starts from a place that we can that seems really understandable, right? The last guest episode that we did was on a Samuel Delany book called Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. A Samuel Delany book called Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. Open your mouth. We sort of ended up that episode with a discussion of what truth is, because that's something that book is about, but also like that book posits that truth is fetish, that, you know, in a world where like the internet is, and, you know, and like mass culture has turned everything into a mush, that and nothing is really knowable, what you can know is what you're into. And in the same way, like there is like something that is undeniable going on here, and that is that this person is really, really, really concerned with how these three men died 100, you know, an X number of years ago, and this is going to be the crux of her life, and it doesn't appear that that is mutable or changeable. And so, like, in the search for this, you know, essentially unknowable piece of information about how these men died, there is that truth that she wants to know. And that's sort of the foundation stone upon which this whole narrative is built. But I can understand this because I have multiple friends who have like a weakness for disaster narratives.
Yeah.
Like, shout out to my friend Taylor, who has read every like mountain climbing disaster book ever written, as far as I can tell. And, you know, although would never want to do it herself, like wants to think about what hypoxia does to you all the time. And like, this does not have a place in my heart, right? I cannot understand this.
I can understand. I mean, you know, I went and got a PhD in history partly to find out just how a fictional judge would have been criminally punished. So, like, I get it, right? There's the fascination of you, like, of just wanting to know. I think that because the mystery ends up being sort of scary and eating at you, but if you know, then it kind of doesn't matter how horrible it is. That still feels safer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I am a big disaster narrative guy. It is unsurprising. Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, it is not a thing that tends to be especially close to me when my life is going great. It is a thing that happens when,
yes,
like, I had one of my sort of recurrent like polar periods, you know, like in 2021, you know, like right when just at the bleakest sort of moment, like I think in late 2020, I rewatched The Terror, which is a great show, which I had seen before and loved. But like this time I was like, oh, holy shit, this expedition is the most interesting thing I have ever heard of. And so like it made me a Franklin Expedition guy, which I hadn't been before.
Right. Other people's horrible suffering is a great way of just making your own suffering seem...
Yeah.
And it's not even that it seems less by comparison. It's just like you feel less alone.
I guess I get the same effect from podcasts about industrial disasters and horrifically misfought wars.
And it's also, I think it's validating, you know, like it's
right.
At truly like dark moments in history, you can look at other people because, you know, you can't talk about one of the reasons that polar stuff is so interesting to me is because each one was so much a product of its time and was in many ways like made inevitable by the state that like society and culture and capitalism were in, and the military as well. When the expedition set off, you know, like all of the ingredients for whatever tragedy was going to happen are already set up. And so like, even though these things happen in places that are often isolated from other people or isolated from other Europeans, you know, like you bring your society with you, and your society gives birth to whatever is going to happen when you are far away from it. This seems like an interesting moment to bring up. It's a bit of a tangent, but Usma's only other published work is a children's book she illustrated about Michael Collins,
Right.
who was the third astronaut on the first expedition to the moon, the one who stayed behind in the capsule, and therefore, like who immediately established a record as being like the most alone human being who had ever lived. I don't know. It's
Yeah, no, I can sort of see that, because there is not to eroticize this unduly, but because it's sort of because there's a connection to this in the Ministry of Time, which
we've also read for the podcast.
Yeah, so it was our doing this episode with Ministry of Time that I think brought doing this book to your mind, Isaac.
Yes.
I believe that there's that the fascination that the author has with these men has an element of certainly the romantic, because much attention is paid to Neil's poor fiancée, and who had her heart taken out and cremated and buried with him.
Yep.
Which we know somehow that happened. And the sort of the letters of pining, which form the sort of spine of this narrative, as he cheerfully, stupidly goes further and further toward his demise, which was already inevitable at that point. But there's an element of the Fujoshi afoot here.
Yes.
Yes, though I think that this is also very much about like being interested in the expression of gender. Right? Like this is manliness in its period, even though now we're like, oh, these are the specialist little boys.
But no. They're absolutely, this is the most, I mean, what stopped them from, landing the balloon and trying again later, if not masculinity?
Yeah.
Is that not the most manly man thing that they could possibly have done under the circumstances?
Andree's like last recorded words that were said like outside that were audible to anyone outside of his expedition were something like, like what in the blazes was that? But they could just as well have been dudes rock.
Dudes rock. Flap, 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 flap. Yeah. But like I think that a lot of that a lot of the fascination there must come from these three men. What did they talk about? How did they feel about each other? Like there's sort of, I feel like there's almost some sort of like part of the desire to find out why they died is like, did they kill each other?
Right. Did they kill each other?
Like, did they turn on each other?
Or did they commit
betray
suicide?
Was one of them so heartbroken by the death of the other that he killed himself? It's like, what in this pure sort of isolated test tube, if you want to, be a scientist about it, we're scooping these three men into a little vial and looking at them, how did they bounce off each other and how did they interact, and can we approach the purity of the feelings of three men together when they're completely out of touch with the rest of humanity forever and ever?
Right. Well, and one of the things actually that really made me feel like this is, really made me want to read this as a work by an unreliable narrator was this sense that she's really invested in, it can't be like it can't be trichinosis, it can't be vitamin A poisoning, and she's a doctor, she has very good medical reasons, but there's also just this sense throughout the book of, no, it can't be that. They can't have died to something so mundane.
Yes. No, we need this imaginary, the sequence which she actually writes down as if it were part of the historiography, in the same tone that she's written down the other sort of reconstructed scenes of the polar bear attack. And, Neil's like just going for it, Leroy Jenkinsing himself to an early grave. This feeling that this surely must have been what happened, because any other ending would have been unsatisfying.
You get this with the Franklin expedition too, but with sort of the added, like the theories, there's a lot of like very Baroque, like medical rivet counting that happens around increasingly unlikely ways that these people died. But with like the added layer that there is also like 150 or God, more like 200 now years of Inuit oral history, like detailing in a lot of detail, actually, exactly how everyone died. And it's just, I think for reasons that were obviously partly racist and also obviously partly the fact that disaster folks, they really want the game to be afoot. Like if someone tells them, guys, the game has been caught, like we know what happened. Even if we didn't have like detailed testimony about it, we kind of know what kills people in the Arctic. People will always say, no, it can't be that.
Though I think with the oral history, there's also a sense of, because I think a lot of this sort of this particular disaster narratives and polar disaster narratives, there's this kind of fetishization of the science and the medicine, and
Mhm.
you know, which is why everyone wants it to be these fairly baroque things about, poisoning and things like that, or cannibalism, because everybody loves cannibalism. But you know, oral history is something that feels so mushy, I think, to people, even though, like, from a historian's perspective, we're increasingly convinced that oral history is, should be treated with just the same seriousness as written sources, if not more so. And so, but I think that a lot of people, I think it's not just racism of the sense of, oh, we want to ignore the brown people. It's also this, well, this isn't a traditionally academically credentialed thing, again, even though it is. And so we have to sort of sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, again, it all comes back to what is an acceptable kind of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Where must knowledge be sourced in order to be true? And I think Bia is winking at us and being like, true, huh? How
Right.
much of what I've said to
Yeah.
you already is true, exactly. And I think I actually I didn't get to bring this up during our discussion of the Ministry of Time, and so I'll bring it up now. I'm glad that I've gotten the opportunity. None other than Charles Dickens wrote a play about the Franklin Expedition, in which he posited that the evil natives tricked and then ate the the expedition and then lied about it.
Speaking of cannibalism,
In collaboration with Wilkie Collins. Yeah, they
The natives killed and ate them in collaboration with Wilkie Collins.
so just like these two like great mid 19th century sensationalists, and like people whose like Dickens' politics, they were very like, he was very pro labor. He was very like, he cared deeply about poor people and recognized their personhood, identified as one of them. But like, he was also monstrously fucking racist.
yes.
Jesus Christ, you read this thing and you're like, oh, this is, oh, get me away. Um, yeah, or you read anything about it. I have actually, this has brought up a thing for me, this sort of discussion of like, what is in the eyes of a reader, a writer, an amateur historian, like a person with their own traumas, like whoever is encountering this story, like what is an acceptable form of knowledge to them? It reminded me that I really want to talk about the role of archives in this book, because I am an archivist. And so I am fascinated by the idea of like the Swedish archivist who is okay with sending a bone through the mail in a bubble mailer.
I was thinking about that too. I was like, wow, I had to fill out so many forms just to look at like a digital photograph of a government document.
Yeah, they do it. Do they do it differently in Scandinavia? Like is Bia just that charming, or like is this? I don't know. It's like I have kind of been known as an archivist who, as a reading room reference librarian, will allow researchers to get away with a fair amount. But like, damn, she is really out there, like getting people to send her. And sure, it doesn't turn out to be a human bone, but they don't know that.
Yeah, though it makes me, I do wonder, I mean, now how much of this is glossing over all of the forms and stuff because most people aren't interested in that.
Fair, yeah.
She, and some of this is also speaking sort of academic envy of just the ease by which she gets all of these grants. She's just like, oh yeah, I applied for an artist grant because I'm an illustrator, and they gave me a bunch of money to like go to the Arctic.
Oil wealth.
And so it makes me wonder if actually by this point she had enough, because she is, again, according to some Googling, she is affiliated, at least now, post her best-selling, award-winning book, with the Karolinska Institute, which is a medical university, and involved with their with some of their archival stuff, I think, historical research stuff. So, I mean, it's possible that there's a lot more actual credentialing going on behind the scenes, and she's just skipping over it because it's not as romantic as the rest of it.
Thank you for being a much less credulous reader than me. Like you keep pointing out like these obvious truths that I'm like, oh, how that is true.
Well,
like presumably,
I can make a crack about the difference between a historian and an archivist, but actually, I think it's just that we've read this much more recently.
Did she in fact bring her giant expensive inkjet printer onto this boat and print out the exact color of the sky?
I want to believe. I want.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, maybe she did, because again, she's coming with an artist's grant. On the other,
she's an artist,
right? Like that trip specifically was, I believe, one of the ones that she got on an arts grant. So as an illustrator, so maybe this was also just part of the look. I'm doing illustration stuff, printing out paint chips.
I mean, this is if you get that Antarctic grant, this is the sort of thing that you have to be doing, So, I will say that, like, as far as my feeling about what is true, what can be known, has always been, if I believe it, it's true.
See, I always go, if I want to believe it, it's probably not true.
Yes, this is, I think, part of the fundamental tension that makes this podcast work. But,
and our friendship.
Yes. But I will say, as the ultimate arbiter of truth in the universe, I'm absolutely sure that she and her sister did, in fact, write "There's Trichinosis in It." Yes. And submit it to the Eurovision Song Contest.
That one I want to believe too badly, too. That one, even I have to make let myself believe in. It just
seems like something two bored kids would do.
Yes, and I will now submit my cover of it as evidence.
Excellent.
All right.
I look forward to hearing that jingle.
God, I can't wait. Can I?
I'm gonna have to look up some ABBA chords. When you're feeling alright, everything is uptight. Try to sing a song that goes ding ding dong. There will be no sorrow when you'll sing tomorrow, and you walk along with your ding dang dong. There's trichinosis in it, what a shame you bit it. You know you shouldn't eat a polar bear, 'cause there's trichinosis in it, that's the way you bit it. Dying in your woolly underwear, it's just not fair. But
anywho, Isaac, you were saying.
Oh yeah, I was just going to. I'm just going back to my notes about the archival stuff. The thing that I really wanted to talk about with regard to archives is the way that this book really effectively captures the fundamental archival feeling, which is not really about unburying something no one has ever seen before. It is about like unburying quote unquote real evidence. This is her quotes from quote unquote meaningless junk. And also recognizing, which again I think is subtextual in the book, very close to the surface but not overtly said, that obviously your real evidence can be someone else's meaningless junk, and vice versa. But it really captures just being digging through this stuff until you don't know what reality is anymore. Which it does not take long working in an archive to enter the zone of unreality.
No, it's true. And then, because I liked, it also does definitely capture the feeling of going through, and the archivist has done all the work, but you've still got to comb through all of the, references and just sort of hope that you don't space out right before you get to the most important one.
I thought that there are certain details that were shared that felt like the discovery of the fingernails in the mitten, although that was not something that Bea herself did, just sort of captures that feeling to me. It's
this perfect campfire ghost story. She finds this archivist who clearly loves telling this anecdote, and she just finishes with 3 long human fingernails, and she's got the flashlight under her.
I mean, if I had found 3 long human fingernails while just doing my job, I too would be dining out on that story for the rest of my life.
Yes.
Yeah. Minor notes. It's probably time to start, doing just little minor notes as we head toward the end of the hour. Uh, I I'm a big fan of little Lieutenant fingers in typesetting when the author wants us to pay attention to a
Oh
particular thing.
yes.
Yeah,
Um, so props for that.
it's a beautifully laid out book. Like it's a work of art.
It
Just the
is.
typography.
Unfortunately, the ebook doesn't do a great job with imagery
Mhm.
production at all.
Yeah,
It really made me wish that I'd gotten a paper
I think
copy
that
to
I
go
think I
through.
might be buying a paper copy of
Oh,
this book
excellent.
Yeah.
just to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I have read both. It does get something just because the ebook can't handle.
The thing is that the ebook could totally handle better images than that. I know this because it's part of my job. This is just my guess is that when they were making the ebook, they just scanned the original book and they didn't scan it at high enough DPI, and also like at that point it's a scan of a scan of a scan. But like you could actually find better reproductions online of some of these same images. So there's absolutely no excuse for the fact that like most of the labeled text on these images is illegible.
But regardless, yeah, no, I do think that I will get my hands on a copy just to get the full experience. But the other thing that I wanted to ask was, or I'm not so much ask the room, but ask the universe, is it normal in Scandinavia for globes to have light bulbs inside them? Is that normal for anybody?
I guess so.
I don't know.
There's the whole metaphor about like getting to the top of the globe and finding where the light bulb screws in.
Oh, I didn't think that was supposed to be a globe. I think that was supposed to be a globe like that you put above your light. It's a light fixture. It's not, it's a globe shaped light fixture as opposed not like a map globe.
Oh, I thought from the description of like the various like markings on it that we were talking about a map globe rather than
maybe,
rather
but I thought maybe it was just a mixed metaphor there.
I've seen like when I was a kid in the 80s, I feel like glowing globes were a bit of it, like with a light bulb in them, but it definitely was a sense memory from way before like this book was written. So yeah, I don't know.
I'm gonna look back at that sequence and see if I can't glean anything else from it. Speaking of like what can be known and what can't, like also like if I recall correctly, there's a joke about coming across like the manufacturer's mark at that point, and maybe if I Google up that manufacturer's mark, things will become
Oh
clear.
yeah, maybe there is. I mean, like a light up globe sounds cool.
Absolutely. I was right about this one at least. It is in fact a light up globe. It says made in Taiwan in big letters on it. You can buy a light up globe on Amazon for like $35. But you shouldn't. But regardless, there's for it to being such a brief book, there's so many little hooks and like things that can snatch your interest and attention in here. Which I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, and she's got a great sense. It's really well paced. I find a lot of popular nonfiction, especially historical popular nonfiction, the pacing is off. But this one, I thought that the pacing was just very good. Like she strikes a really good balance between the personal anecdotes and the historical anecdotes, and and because the thing, how the expedition ends from the beginning, and so but she still sort of takes you along through the expedition, and the mystery that's dragging you along is how much is she going to find out about it? How much are we going to know by the end? I was really impressed just with how well it was structured, which is something that I think a lot of popular nonfiction doesn't pay enough attention to.
Yeah, and just even the structure of it where it's it's just to me it's also about our relationships with living people, about the experience of zooming in further and further and trying to dissect and just ultimately realizing the human personality is a mystery. And I think that it's funny because I feel like the ending of the book, which is it's got several endings. Like it's
Yes.
got the personal ending and the historical one, and also sort of this like long index of, okay, here are the ways they could have died, in my opinion. I'm going to break down each one for you. And it just kind of feels like we've zoomed in and we've just lost focus, like it just goes blurry and then it goes black and then it's over. It's great.
But I love that it's just like page after page of deaths and reasons, to believe that this could have caused their death and reasons to believe that it couldn't. And, her opinion on how likely it is. And then and then you get to like the end of Morphine and it just goes, we hope you enjoyed this book.
Yeah.
All right, here's the final question. What do we make of the psychic?
Oh, the psychic! I forgot about the psychic. I have no idea what to make of the psychic, honestly.
The shut up, there's too many dead people trying to talk to you bit.
Which is like such a great bit of cold reading, honestly.
Right?
Yeah.
I viewed the psychic as just like she's desperate for something at this point to convince her to keep going.
I really I enjoyed essentially every part of that. Like from the I'm going to dress like I'm a sort of a Romany because I feel like that's appropriate when I'm consulting a psychic.
That was...
And she's just a normal person with kids, and who has to get to soccer practice or whatever it was, and then like just like snip snap, is in, is out, figures out what she wants, what she's trying to do. Presumably knows about this polar expedition, which apparently everybody in Sweden knows about.
It's kind of iconic there, I gather. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, all right.
There was a feature film that I've been told is quite good, and I've never been quite in the right mood to watch it, called The Flight of the Eagle, starring, oh my God, the most famous Swedish actor, Max von Sydow.
Yes, that would be the most famous Swedish actor.
So yes, a big thing in Sweden. The psychic definitely knew about it. The psychic is definitely doing some sort of classic, like relying on like what she knows and what Bea appears to be responding to. But also, like, I'm really glad that you brought this one up last to just get my brain back on track here. Because like I think that the psychic scene is kind of the heart of the book. It's just this sort of perfect uniting of like a scientific inquiry that comes from the least scientific possible like origins. And it's just sort of like the meeting of science and desire in one person's mind, and just sort of the recognition that they're not all that different. They're both just thoughts. They're both aspects of this woman's search for truth.
Yes. And when you're cold reading somebody, you never know that you might cause them to spend 8 hours searching a craggy
Yeah.
Right.
You got to be careful.
Plateau with a boat full of rubes.
Right, she got an entire boat full of people to go and search this island. And this is actually very good storytelling, because I knew that they weren't going to find it. There's no way they were going to find it, but I was still like, are they going to find it?
Yes. No, the trick of creating suspense when it's all a foregone conclusion is very much on display here.
It is a Wes Anderson movie. Like I couldn't finish this without dropping the name of Wes Anderson, both in these sort of perfectly symmetrical, like you could see, right? Like one of his perfectly symmetrical shots of objects with like Andree's supplies, and just sort of like the hapless, melancholy comedy of somehow convincing that many people to look for a letter with you on an island. It's really
yes.
He needs
almost
to
100 years, that was dropped almost 100 years ago from a balloon.
Yeah.
Oh, a balloon, you say? Yeah. No, this is a Wes Anderson movie about a Coen Brothers movie.
Yes. Holy, that you cracked it.
All right, I don't think I'm going to top that.
Yeah,
so
I know. I think that's a good note to end on, honestly.
Thank you so much for joining us, Isaac.
I am so glad that you asked me to join you on this journey.
I'm so glad that you provided us this
excellent book to read. So,
hell yeah, I'm glad you agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.